Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through all of what we did last Wednesday. So this way, all of the tutorial pieces are going to be in one video for all of you to be able to reference. All right, so when we start, we have our new document set up. Like I mentioned before, we have choices with inches, points, pixels if we're creating for screen, pica, but for right now we're going to use inches. Okay, so we're going to use just like we did before, 8.5 by 11. Make sure that you can have pages 1, start on page 1, that's fine, but you want to make sure you have facing pages selected. If you do not, you will not be able to put pages left of that spine. Margins, we're going to hit 1/4 of an inch, and then bleeds 1/8 of an inch. All right, the slug we can leave at 0, and then once you have all this, you can hit create. Eventually. Okay. All right, so right off the bat, we want to save our file. Now, I had mentioned before, you want to make sure that your document and all of your links are organized, because if they are not, and you don't have everything copied over at the very end when you go to export, you'll have errors. So on your desktop or wherever you're going to save this, make a new folder. And then everything to do with that project should be inside this folder. So we're going to go up to Save As. All right. I'm going to go to Desktop. And then save, and then I'm going to dump all the images that I created for this tutorial in there as well. All right, so you'll see you have your INDD file right here, and I'm going to move these in. Right here as well. All right, so TIFF, EPS, PDF, and then Illustrator. All right. Now, the first thing we did was make sure that we're able to put our pages right next to each other. So I'm going to pull my Pages tab in here so you can see. And then what we're going to do is whenever you try and add a page and you move it right next to it, it's going to push it right below. You will not be able to move a page right next to this, all right? And then as you bring it in after that first page, then you can see the two pages line up side by side. The reason being is if this is a stitched booklet, then this would be the cover, and then the back cover would be sitting down here all by itself. If this was a perfect bound booklet, then this would be page 1 right here, and the inside front cover would be sitting here, which is printed completely separate. That gets wrapped around the interior. So by default, it doesn't allow you to put anything to the left of this. So what you need to do is you select all of your pages, click on the little 3-line icon, and these two options here, you want to deselect. So once you have those deselected, now you can see you can put that page right up against there. And you can also add mini pages, which is what we're going to be doing for this project. All right, because you're going to end up having multiple panels that get folded into one another, and you want to create the inside and outside, so you end up having 2 of these. Okay, so let me grab a couple pages here. So the other thing that we talked about quickly is making backups. All right. Now, InDesign files notoriously get corrupt for a number of reasons. Plugins going from one version to another, or simply you just have bad luck. All right, but it does happen, and it happens often enough that you want to make backups. So back in here, you have your InDesign file. Then you have this here that's sitting here. Anytime that you're working on an InDesign file, you're going to have this file right next to it. This is insignificant to you at the moment. All right. So all you need to do is copy this file. When we close this out, this file will actually disappear. So what you want to do is as you make it, or rather as you progress to a certain stage in your project, just quickly, just like in Illustrator that I showed you, you hold Option, and you can see as I hit Option, a little plus symbol shows up. You drag it over, and now you have a copy of everything that was here. All right. So even if you end up having multiple copies throughout this project, have it. So this way, if something happens to your main file, you only lose a certain portion of what you're actually working on. All right. Okay. All right. So just like with the business card file and what we discussed with the packaging, the red line on the outside is your bleed. The purple, bluish, pink line on the inside is your safe margin. Just like in everything else, when you send something out to print, often there'll be slight shifts when you're printing it, okay? Within our own studio, within the lab itself, you have 100% control of where you can cut your file. So really, there's no need for shifting at all, except the fact that you're going to be printing on two sides. And even with the printer in the lab, there will be slight shifting. So you just want to account for that shifting, and you want to make sure that you don't have any white edges to your design if you have a background image or color that goes beyond the trim line. All right. Okay, so we talked about creating footers. All right. So when you want to create any kind of footer with a page number or any other information that would sit at the bottom of every single page, you click your type tool, and I should probably pull this toolbar out. All right, so you have your type tool, the same exact thing that we do in Illustrator. Same rules apply, right? The only difference is you can't just click on the screen. You actually have to create a text box for every time that you want to type. But if you want to type on a curve, if you want to type within a shape, all that is doable within InDesign as well. All right, so we have page 1, we're going to have page 2. I'm going to select a typeface. My computer is running so fast today. Select this, medium, 19. All right, so I have this sitting here. Then I'm going to have some other information for the footer. Okay. And then I want to have it for the other side as well. All right. So now, like I said before, you don't want to sit here and actually manually type in, page 1, page 2, and then copy this and paste it on the other one. We want to create some sort of template that would end up being replicated across all of the pages. Also, you don't want to actually type in page 1 and page 2, right? Imagine again, like this project you're working on has 200 pages. And for some reason, halfway through the book around page 100, you decide, you know what, I'd really like to move page 100 through 110 over where page 50 starts. Then you're not going to sit there and go through all of those pages and manually change the page numbers, all right? So what you do is once you figure out all of your type, like you should go through the process of manually putting everything in first. You got to figure out what your typeface is going to look like, what size, what color, all of the information should be solidified before you start creating your template, basically, all right? Once you have this set, you then can delete that page number. You go up to type, you go to insert special character, you go to markers, and you go to current page number. So there it is, page 1. Then the same thing is going to happen here. All right, type, insert, markers, current page number. And there's page 2. But now what we want to do is have it on both pages. And again, you don't want to just copy and drop it in here and paste, because then you don't want to have to manually do anything different for these. So if you add a new page somewhere in the middle, you don't want to go back and copy and pasting again, all right? So what you do is once you have that all set, you can hit Command, select everything, hit Command X, then double click in your parent, all right? Once you have your parent open here, you hold Option Command Shift and hit V. And that will then paste what you just created within this parent, all right? So now when we double click back in here, you can see that that page, the footer for each page is automatically in there. And they're not clickable, all right? So if you want to make a change and say, you know what, I really don't want this text sitting here, then you go up to here and you can delete it. And now when you come back to your pages, that's gone. So anything that you do in your parent will then be replicated into every one of your pages. Now, there are times that you want to, for only one page, release the template of what you have going on from the parent. Now, what you do is you hold Shift and Command, and all you do is just click and drag across, and it releases that whatever was behind that. So then you can delete it, or let's say we were going to have like a some image or a color that was affecting the actual text itself. Since we're using black, we really want to change this to white. You now can come up and go and change that text to white. All right. So again, whenever you want to release just part of the text, it's Command Shift and just drag over, and it will release it. And then you can hit delete. If for some reason you want to bring it back, let's say you change your mind and now you delete this, and you actually want to bring back these elements, you can click within the parent and drag back in here, and it will revert that page back to the main parent. It will not affect anything else in your design. It will only bring back those elements and push them back into the background that are not clickable. All right. Okay. All right. So now dropping in your text, we looked at ways of bringing in and creating text boxes. So I'm going to use the text from Connecticut coming up, and I'm going to pull in this header text, and then this text. All right, so let's change this. All right. Now again, remember we talked about how it is your job, it's the designer's job to clean any of the text that is handed to you. Especially when you're grabbing text from the web, there will be certain characteristics or certain elements that you copy over that actually have no business being in a printed design. For example, right here we have the number 2 sitting here that will bring us to some reference. We want to get rid of that. There's also times when the editor or whoever was publishing the information, giving it to you, would actually have other notes in there or some other information that is not necessary. Again, sometimes all the text would be handed to you and someone was very angry or just forgot and had their caps locked and then just decided to keep going with it. So you do need to be the one to go through the text first and make sure all the text is nice and clean. I want to bring in some more of this text. All right. Okay, so the first thing, the easiest way to add in columns is to then, with this text selected up here on the top, you'll have a little icon that kind of shows these columns. Below it will be the actual gutter between those columns. All right. So if we hit 2, and then you can see the gutter sitting in here, and then you can see the 2 columns of text, right? That's the easiest way to set up 2 columns of text. Now, the rule for this value, which is the space between the 2, is that it has to be more than the space between each paragraph, okay? So you don't want to have the I as it's reading. You can see how, when you go to, the end of this paragraph with cite, it's actually closer to width than it is to dropping down going next. So you don't want to accidentally have the I jump the gutter and run into the next column. So you want to increase that gutter to make sure you keep that column evenly, or rather more than the spacing between the next 2, okay? Now, there are different ways that you can have this set up, the spacing from one paragraph to the next, okay? So what we're going to do is, so up here, you go in and you delete all of the spaces that you have. All right. Now, it's impossible to see from one to the next, from one paragraph to the next paragraph. But now, with everything selected, up here you have this option. If you don't see this showing up on your monitor, you want to pull up your paragraph. All right, so when you have your paragraph tab open, the same options that's showing up here on mine will be showing up here on your paragraph tab. All right, so right here, this icon here is at 0. When we increase it, you can see every time that a new paragraph starts, you can see a little bit of a space shows up. So by doing this, you can then have a much tighter column sitting here between the 2, right? So now I can drop this back in a little bit tighter without having the accidental of increasing or decreasing of that spacing there. So your eye will not jump from one column to the next, rather flowing down on the left before jumping over to the right. All right. The other thing that we want to make sure of is that you turn off your hyphenation. Always turn off your hyphenation to start. There are times that you have to have hyphenation, but you always want to try and maintain a much cleaner read for the person going through your actual design. All right. So now the other way of setting up your columns is to do it manually, which is the advantage of having manually is that you have more control of how the columns of text work. All right. So you sit here, you figure out what this column should be. Then you create another text box to the right. And then you'll see every time that you have more text that's being shown, there'll be a little red box sitting here. All right. And you'll also see an error. So if you click on that error, it will tell you that you have more text, overset text than where it is. If you have a multiple page document, right, like I said, 200 pages or so, this here will take you to whatever that page is. So it's not like you have to hunt for that actual error. So you click on the red box, and now you can see my cursor has a bunch of text right next to it. once I click inside the next text box, that text flows into the next one. All right, so if I was to delete this paragraph, that text just wraps up into there. Okay, so this is another way of having text boxes that you control independently. So if you don't want them to be equal and you want one to be a little bit shorter than the next, or if you're moving them over, different pages and you want to continue that text string, you would want to have two linking text boxes as opposed to just simply coming up here and creating two columns within that one text box. Okay? All right. We talked about baseball bats. We talked about apostrophes. So a lot of times when we type out a apostrophe or open quote and close quote, and we just simply hit the inch mark, it will automatically assume that you're using a open quote and close quote. Okay. So all the design programs that you use, there is an option within the preferences to have, typographers quotations. Within web design and a lot of times when things are put onto screen use, you don't have that option. So there are times that when you copy text over, you would actually be copying over an inch mark or a foot mark. Okay. So you want to make sure that when you're going through your text, you want to make sure that it's cleaned up and it actually has the proper punctuation, quotation, and apostrophes. All right. Okay, the other thing. So I mentioned about there is really no need to learn pica, except for when you are working with columns and trying to figure out a smooth, readable text. So let me pull up my character. All right. So every time you have text, you have leading that is sitting here at 120% of whatever this text is. And to make things super easy, let's make it 10 points. So now we know 10 points, 120% of that is 12. Okay. If you see parentheses, that right there is the default of 120% of that text. Okay, so as you increase it, you can see this increases, right? It's always increasing to 120%, but this is only rules for readable text, okay? Within, a copy text. This is not when you're dealing with any kind of headline text or a lot of times bullet point text, but it does deal with readable text. Now, as you're reading, there is a certain sweet spot that you want to keep your text line within. Okay, if it's too narrow, then our eyes will get super frustrated and annoyed that we keep going back and forth way too quickly. If it's too long, then you have the potential that when you get to the end of the line, you can't actually track back to the very next line. All right, so you want to make sure you have a nice, clean balance that you go to the end nice and comfortably, and then you go to the next. If it goes too long, you have to increase your spacing. So this way then as you get over there, there's enough spacing there to track back to the next line. This is why when you write reports that are going across 8.5, 11 sheet, that it is double spaced. So this way it's easier to read back and go to the next line. Okay? So, pica. If you want to figure out right off the bat, now this is not 100% rule. This is just an excellent starting point, right? You want to figure out what the characters per line is, right? So somewhere between 50, 70, depending on the X height of the text will determine. It could be as high as 80 characters per line, all right? But to start off, you figure out what your point size is, right? So we have 11 points, you double it. So it's 22. So then it's 22 pica is what you would want to make this text box. So up here, my width, I'm going to go 22p and hit return. All right, that's a starting point. A lot of times, personally, I feel that's too narrow. There are times that I want to make it a little bit wider, but it's a good starting point to figure out what that length is, okay? Now, you can go a little bit wider. Let's say that we want to have this. So if you go 2.5, then we're making it, what is 2.5? I do not feel like doing math right now. All right. So we got 11 points, 2.5, so 27.5. All right, so that would be the maximum that you'd want to do for 11 points. The minimum is, say, 1.5. So oops, that is not what I want. I want this. So 16.5 pica. And that would be the absolute minimum, all right? So somewhere in between those two, you would have a comfortable, readable width for your column of text. The 22 points would be a perfect if you were going with a 2-column text, right? So we have 22 point, we have this side by side. And now we have the 2 columns going down, all right? So that's the only time that I feel that it's necessary, or rather a luxury of understanding what pica is when you're going to be figuring out the comfortable characters per line. All right, so that's everything that we had covered on Wednesday. All right, so the next thing is when we're figuring out bullet points. So now when you're trying to figure out the way the text kind of flows to the actual page itself, I kept stressing that you want to design for your content. You want to make sure that whatever you do, it reflects for what the content you're working with. It reflects the way the type flows. All right, there are many times that you want to have very wide text, right? But in here, with these bullet points that I haven't set up yet, you can see a lot of dead wasted space. So there are times that you can't actually do something with the way your text is working. So that's why you always have to, when you are looking at examples and you're looking at other page layout, you want to be very careful of looking at specifics. That way, or the way that that page is being laid out, is working because that's the way that text allows it to. It doesn't necessarily mean your text is going to work the same way. So you have to, like I said, drop all your text into your document, for one, to see how much text you're working with. All right? You may have all these ideas that have a huge image taking up half of this page, but then once you drop your text in, it ends up taking up almost 3/4 of that page, and you don't have that much room. So you want to always make sure you know what you're working with before you actually start laying out your type. All right. So now, once we have this here, I want to show you how to include the bullet points, right? So you don't simply just hit Option 8 and push the text, all right? Because what's happening is the next line drops down, and you don't want it to sit underneath the bullet point. So you select just the lines that are going to be bullet points, just here. Then you go up here and you click on the actual bullet points. So now you can see all of that text has a nice clean left alignment to everything that's happening. Okay? Let me bring this back in. All right, and actually I'm gonna do this so all the text is there. Okay. All right, so that's how you set up the bullet points. In a few, I'm going to show you how to actually adjust the spacing for everything. All right, But first I want to kind of go back to options for alignment. All right, so you want to make sure that your text boxes do not create any awkward shapes. All right. The other thing is you want to turn off these blue lines. All right. So you go to View, go to Extras, Hide Frame Edges. So this way then when you're looking at the actual text, you can see the design without all that blue edges there. And you can see this here is an issue. All right. You can see how, you have these up and down, up and down, up and down. And then all of a sudden you have this smooth curve coming down. You want to avoid any kind of shapes that become distracting to the person reading your actual text itself. All right. Also, you want to avoid your orphans, right? So we have reasons, we got required, and we got amendment. All right. You do not want to have any orphans in your layout. So, simply if you were to create a little bit wider text, you end up trying to get rid of it, right? This doesn't take care of that one. And if, let's say, what you're trying to do doesn't actually get rid of all of the orphans, then you have other ways that you can come in here and then maybe do like a return. Now remember, we're using this spacing here for a return. So if I simply just click return, now we have a space here that we actually don't want because this should be the same paragraph. So you end up going and you hold shift and return, and it will give a soft return. So this way it doesn't end up creating a whole nother space. This is awful. Having this space here is not good. So now I'm going to get rid of that option. I'm going to come up to a different text to see if that works. If that doesn't work, then what you can do is try and play around with your tracking. So you select your text, you hit a couple going in, you can see that's not working. Then we have room to make this a little bit wider, which probably will. All right. All right. So now we have this evenly ragged text sitting here. All right. So that's what you have to go through at the end to figure out to clean everything up. I think I will do that. And then this. All right. Now, the other thing you have is your force justified, right? So the text. So with all this text sitting here, if we do a justified, that creates a block text sitting here, then it will create the text line that's all the way on the left and the right. The thing you want to be careful of with this is huge gaps sitting in between your text, all right? If this is the direction you're going, there are times that you have to have things hyphenated because then it keeps everything nice and clean and it removes that awkward spacing. So if you do like the block text, the justified type, then I do suggest clicking on the hyphenate if your text starts forming all of these huge rivers, these gaps within the text itself. All right, you can see here all of this issue. So that's the only time. There are times, depending on your text that you're using, you can't use justified type, no matter what you do. All right, so there are times that you are stuck with a left alignment text. All right, all right. All right, so now text frame options. So now let's say we were doing this. We want to keep this text sitting here. For some reason, I wanted to have this text sitting here, this text drop down because I wanted some sort of image sitting here, and then that I want to align to this. Now, when you're using this option for the text to kind of push away from a new paragraph, you want to still make sure all of your columns are lining up. All right. So if we click on this text box and hit Command B, it will pull up this text frame option. Okay. Now, by default, your justification is always aligned to the top, right? If we do bottom, you can see now it moved to the bottom, and now it's aligned, or will be, once I select this and hit bottom as well. All right, but now you can see it broke off from there. So you want to make sure, depending on what you're using and how you're justifying everything, that all your text is lining up. This text box to there, that to there, but you want to make sure that's lined up properly too. The another option you can do is select your text and then hit justify. And what that will do, it will move the text to the top and to the bottom. All right, so now this justified to this, to there, and then to there. All right, but you want to be careful that the text box has enough lines that it doesn't look awkward, right? Like as you're coming through here, even though there's an extra space there, because of all these spaces, it doesn't look awful. This looks strange just because of the leading is now pushed too far. So there are times that you want to maybe have the justify just to these two, but then the one that's carrying over here, you want to keep it to the top. All right. All right, so that is how you would line up the multiple text boxes, make sure everything works properly and is aligned. All right, now bringing in images. So let me go to these images here. So in Photoshop, you want to make sure right off the bat is your photo is high res and cmyk, right? We're creating something to be printed, so we want to make sure everything is cmyk. If we were creating everything for a screen, then it would be RGB. All right, so it's cmyk. Then the image size, you want to make sure it is 300 dpi. All right, so at 300 dpi, you can see the max width that we can print this at is a little over 4 1/4. All right. Now you can see these three lines sitting here. If you open up an image and it is at 72 points, all right. So the resolution, low res, 72. You can see how the inches just shot up, right? Usually you'll see this. Only the width and height is proportionate, but the resolution sits by itself. Okay. You can see image size right here, and you can see the dimensions. If I simply change this to 300, you can see now that image size is huge, right? That is not good. That's not what you want. You can see this stayed the same physical print size, but the resolution increased from a low res to a high res. That is not what you can do. All you're going to do is make your text, make your image blurry. So what you want to do is make sure you have this turned off. So this way all three lines are dependent on one another. So now when I change this to 300, it doesn't change the physical, or rather it doesn't change the size of the document itself, but it will change the physical size. So this way it's taking all that information at a low res and pushing all those pixels together, thus making it a high res image, but at a much smaller size itself. All right, so you just want to make sure your document, your images are set to 300, and then make sure it is cmyk. If it is a flat image, save it as a TIFF. All right. If it is a background, remember how we used the pen tool and we clipped around the apple to change the color of it? So in that case, you can see that the path clipped all the way around, selected the background, deleted it. Same thing, you want to make sure that it is cmyk, but then you want to save it as a Photoshop PDF. So this way, when you bring it into InDesign, the background won't be there. If you have a white background that still has a shadow, you still save it as a TIFF. All right. If you want to clip this out and you don't want to save it as a PDF, you can then use the pen tool, create a path. So here's the path, right? Clipping path, select path 1, and hit OK. You will see the change in path 1, all right? So now when you save it as a Photoshop EPS, it will pull in this path and remove everything in the background, essentially giving you the same thing that you did with the PDF, all right? All right, so you have your document open. You have your images sitting here, all right? If you click and drag into your InDesign, and you sit here for a second, you can see the image is attached to my cursor. If I simply just click on the screen, it will make that image 100% of what it can print at. So now I know that this can only be printed at 300 dpi. And you can see here a little bit more than 4 1/4 that we showed in Photoshop. All right. Where's my link info? All right. Let me get these out of here. Okay. So every time you bring in an image, there's going to be information about that link. Okay. It will show you where that file is right here in the path. So you can see that this file is right here on my computer. It will tell me the actual resolution, the effective resolution. It will tell me that it is cmyk, right? So it pulls in a bunch of information for all your every image that you bring in. All right. You can also create a shape, right? So we have this shape here, and when I drag an image onto there, it will automatically know that it wants to go inside that shape. Okay. Now, every time you bring in an image, there are multiple boxes. What's happening? All right. There's a blue box that is the shape of the container, right? So it's just like with all of these text boxes, the blue box is the container. So if you wanted to make this a little less narrow and not affect the image, you can see that blue box sits here. It's almost like creating a mask. There's a little disc that shows up. That there, when you click it, now it turns to red. This here is the actual image itself. So if I make this smaller, you can see it sits within that text box, that image box, right? But it stays inside the blue box. So you can see the blue box sits here, but the red box of the image itself sits there. Now, if I had this circle, and I definitely wanted this to be the size of a circle, I increase the size beyond, all right? Now, we come in here, and you can see this image, the actual resolution was set at 300. But because we made it bigger than what it was, the resolution, the effective, the actual, what it's going to print at is 208. So it's actually less. So when you end up making something bigger than it's supposed to, there's a good chance that this will now print pixelated. So you want to try and keep this as close to 300 as you can. All right. This that we made smaller, you can see because we started at 300 but made it less, you can see now the effective resolution is 432. Okay. So you want to keep an eye on this so that make sure later on when you go to print, you're not surprised by any kind of low-res images that you then have to go back and make changes to. Okay? All right, so now I'm going to hit save, and I want to show you what happens if we are not careful with our organization. All right? So we have this file here, and everything is good, but for some reason I forgot to copy it, or I didn't save it, or it got deleted, so it's not part of this. You can see it's still on my computer, sitting here outside this. When I go back to my InDesign file, you can see I have an error, 2 errors. I click, and it says missing link, and here are the 2 that's missing. All right? It's just not there. The path that it was once is now gone. So that means no matter what I do, I cannot export this and print it. Okay? So you need to make sure that you stay organized with all of the images that you bring in to InDesign. And it should say no errors. Everything is good. Okay? All right. Let's delete this for a second. Now, let's say I want to make this smaller. And then I want to give this a text wrap. So what I want to do is I want this image sitting here, and I want to push the text away. All right? I go to my text wrap. I have a second monitor, which is why I'm pulling things in from the left. Okay, so here's your text wrap. By default, nothing. There's no text wrap on anything. When you go to wrap around bounding box, it will push everything away from the bounding box itself. If you go to the object shape itself, you can see now that wraps around the curve. Then, as you increase, you can see how much further away the text is pushed. So now you can move this around in your design, and it will automatically move everything around for you. All right? No matter where it goes. Okay. Now, let's bring in the other files that was set up. So let's bring in this one here. We have our TIFF. And I want to do the same thing. I want this to sit here. I'm going to send it to the back. I create this, and you can see bounding box. If I do this, and then I come down here, you have other options that you can choose, right? So if I hit detect edges, you can see that it kind of went past all the white and instantly just kind of moved the text right up against it. So now as I increase it, you can see the text moves away. So if you have an image that has an entire white background, you can then have this detect edges for you. All right. If we bring in, well, this will be the same thing in a way. So we bring in the PDF. So the similar things are going to happen, right? The only difference is just before, with this being pushed to the front, you can see it had the white background. Same thing. We're going to hit this. Detect edges. And there you go. All right. The advantage of obviously having a PDF is that if we have any kind of color in the background, you can see that the PDF has no background. All right. With a TIFF with the white, you're kind of limited to what you can do. All right. Now the last one is the EPS file that we have. All right. So now when you bring this in and you put it in here and you add a text wrap to it, you will now have the option for Photoshop path, right? And we named it path 1. So we'll actually remember all the information that you had set up in Photoshop, and it drags it in to the InDesign. And now you can increase this. All right. Now there are times that you want to ignore text wrap. All right. Case in point, we want to affect this, but I really don't want it to affect anything that's happening over here. Right. So if I move this down, sitting here, and it's kind of pushing all this around, I want to control the spacing here independently from what's happening here. So if we go back to this column and we hit Command B that we did before, you can see there's an option, Ignore Text Wrap. When you click it, you can see the text is not affected by that text wrap. So now I can individually go in and make changes, or I can see that I really want this to be a little pushed over a little bit more. And then I want this to have a return. All right, so there are times that you want to, when you are playing around with text wraps, you would then go in and make adjustments by ignoring it and then having it only affect what you want it to be affected with. All right, so that is a text wrap. You can add a text wrap to anything. All right, say you had a pull quote or something else on some other text box, right? So we have this sitting here. And we bring this in and we actually want this to kind of break through. You do not simply come in here and hit return a couple times. All right? Because again, what if you change your mind and decide, oh, I really don't want that anymore, and you move it. You now need to go back in here and get rid of that spacing. So you come in here, you hit text wrap, you move in, you can see how it pushes everything away. All right? You can control with a text box, you have more options. So let's say I actually want this to be a little bit tighter, or I really want this to be pushed out further. If this is selected and you try to increase, you can see it's pushing top and bottom. But if you have this deselected, you can just increase the bottom or the left. All right. So you have a little bit more options than when you're having an image and trying to detect the edges of that image itself. All right. All right, optical alignment. So in Illustrator, whenever you're working with alignment, and especially, let's do this justified type. All right. Anytime that you have this, your job, what you're trying to figure out is keeping everything super clean, right? A nice straight line coming down. But then if you have punctuation that kind of sits at the end of the line, you really want to push that out. You don't want it sitting in there because now the I kind of indents in and comes out and goes back in. So you want to go to your type, go to story, and then you have this option here. So when you select this, it pushes any time that you have any kind of punctuation out. So this way then it kind of maintains a little bit cleaner edge of your text. All right. So this is very useful when you have copy text. It is not useful when you have larger text. Because what will happen is certain letters, especially W's and Y's, it will push that too far out. All right, so you don't want to end up having very large text that looks awkward and having that text kind of like jumping out too far. All right, so there are times that you want to use it within this, but there are times you do not want to use it with larger title text. All right. In Illustrator, this is called hanging punctuation. So when you go up into your preferences, you can have that selected to push all of your punctuation outside the text box. All right. All right. All right. Done. The other thing is when you're working on larger text, you want to, definitely, play around with your tracking. You do not want to keep everything, by default. Remember, in type, every single program you use, all of the metrics that goes into it, the tracking, the leading, the kerning pairs, all of that information is always geared towards smaller, readable copy text. It's not anything to do with larger text or smaller text, all right? So when the text gets larger, you have to decrease the leading. When the text gets super small, you have to increase the tracking. You increase the tracking when it's smaller, decrease the tracking here. The leading, you also decrease. Remember, the 120%, for leading is only for copy text. When you are working with text that is larger, you definitely don't use 120%. That's huge. All right, so you always decrease to something that is a little bit more tighter for what you're working with. All right. Okay. All right. Now let's go to tabs. All right. So we talked about how to control the spacing here. All right. So what you work with are your tabs. What are my tabs? 1 second. All right. Why is it not showing up? All right. All right. So once you have your tab sitting here, you then can see, actually, let's say that this is kind of like comes in wherever it is. If you hit the little magnet, whatever text you have selected, it will sit directly above. So you can see the first option here controls where the bullets land, and then you have your indentation away from the bullets. So if you have tabs, you would then see this you control even without the bullets. All right. So this here is where you would control where the bullets lay within the actual design and how far the text is away from the bullets. All right. This is true. Let's create a quick little tab and then 2 tabs. So here you end up having your tab that you can control where this first tab is. All right. So anytime that you don't want to just simply use the default, this is what you would use to create the line, the columns for each of the tabs itself. All right. For what you guys are working on, this really is the only thing that you'll be working with bullets. I do not see anyone that would end up having to utilize any of this. Also, the leader you wouldn't be utilizing as well. That's typically is something that is for, let's say you're creating a menu or a table of contents, and you have the text on the left-hand side, and then you have the price or the page number all the way on the right. You don't end up having like this vast gap of space. You actually want the eye to be able to kind of follow from one edge all the way to the right column and then see where that is. So then you can end up having a leader sitting there leading it to the other side. All right. All right. Let's see. Next. All right. Styles. I'm going to actually talk about that in person because I think it can be confusing. And then swatches. So like when you're dealing with color. All right, so we have our, by default, this is all the colors that they give you for InDesign. And then you have your color palette sitting here. All right, so the same thing that we talked about for the project 1 in Illustrator and creating swatches. The importance of that is the same thing. You know, you have different colors in mind. You see different colors on screen that then, you know, would change a certain way for everybody, depending on what they're looking at. And then when you go to print, it looks a little different. So then you have to go in and make adjustments based on, you know, what the color is. Same thing within InDesign. So once you have the colors that you want to use, you know, you just click the little plus symbol and then that swatch will sit here for you. You can double click it and you can actually change the name. So there are times when you're working on something you can say, all right, I want all my page titles or my section titles or whatever the case may be you can change that color to something, right? So this way, every time that you have text that you want to use with that, you can then simply click on that and it will change it to that color, okay? So you can have as many swatch colors as you want. And then, when you need to make adjustments, you would then sit here. So if you printed it out and you said, you know what, or let's say you just change your mind, you don't want that color at all. You make the change to the swatch and then it will automatically make that change wherever that is, okay? All right. Do that later. And then, yeah. So the only things that I want to go over tomorrow is changing the page size increments, all right? Because without showing you the example of what I'm creating, I think that doesn't make sense. So I'd rather do that in person. The other thing I want to do in person is go over styles for actual type. I think it's important to set up your styles because then again, just the same rationale as to why you create your swatches and you make changes, the same thing happens, all right? If you end up choosing a certain typeface or a size or a color and you make a change to it and then you print it out and everything looks a little awkward and you need to beef up the weight, then if you have that across multiple pages, you can just change the actual style and it will change it across the board for you. All right. The other thing is I showed you bringing in images from Illustrator. Well, if you also have like an illustration that you want to bring in, you have two ways of doing it. If you treat it simply as like an image, you can bring it in, right? So it serves the same way as an image itself. It is super low res. If you have your normal and then your display, sitting at typical. If you go high quality, the computer chugs, especially if you have multiple programs open. All right. The other way is to have your Illustrator file open side by side. Again, this is why I suggest not having the application frame as a default when you're working with InDesign, Illustrator. You want to be able to have the two of them open side by side. You can click and drag directly from Illustrator into InDesign. All right, so then when you bring this in, you drop it in, and now this file sits in here. Now, the advantage is that it is part of this. It is the same as if you use the pen tool to create this shape. All right, I can ungroup everything and everything can kind of come apart. All right, I can use it as an option to drag an image into, right? Because it's now part of a shape, right? There are more options that you have when you drag from Illustrator directly in. The disadvantage, it increases your file size, all right? So when you drag this in, if you have a lot of images and a lot of detail and a lot of anchor points, then it increases the size of your file. Not significantly, but enough. So if you find that your program is starting to kind of chug and crash a bit and you have a ton of illustrations, if you're simply using them as an image, then I suggest dragging them in from here and creating a link to them. So this way it keeps it as a much lower res file, and it will keep the actual physical file size of InDesign lower, thus making everything run a little bit quicker and smoother. All right, so it depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve from the illustration, whether you drag from Illustrator in or you simply just click and drag as a link. All right. All right, I think that's really where I want to stop. So the only thing is to cover over 3 very quick things, but I want tomorrow to really be a work day. And this way I can look at what the ideas are for everybody and then, see where we're at at the end of the class time. If we need to make adjustments to the scheduling, we will. All right, so like I said, this was a very quick turnaround project, and if we have to adjust things for everybody's sanity, then we will. I do apologize again for canceling class yesterday. I hope this helps any of you, and you can kind of revisit it if you need to. All right, so I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.